Gender concerns everyone. Everyone has a relationship to gender. This relationship is variable depending on where one is positioned within society, on the institutional, political, cultural context of individuals, and on social transformations. And so gender really is necessary for understanding the ways in which the world works, the nuances and complexity involved, and the ways that we can mobilize to address inequalities and drive social change towards a better society. Gender research reveals the ways in which social life, whether cultural, political, economic life, is structured by power relations. And gender also allows us to understand or explore who benefits from these power relations. How do systems of oppression and systems of hierarchy influence the ways in which people experience life? LSE Gender Studies Department has been generating influential research for over 3 decades. Our research falls within 5 broad themes. One is cultural production, practices and representation. Another is care, labor and political economy. Yet another one is social movements, rights, justice. The next is security, conflict and peace. And finally, all these are bound by theory, methodology and ethics.
In my work, I approach questions of development and human rights by examining historical, social and economic processes that produce and sustain global inequalities, rather than just thinking about development as a response to problems located in the Global South. I look at the politics of global governance regimes, especially on migration management, anti-trafficking and modern slavery, and women's empowerment, focusing mostly on how major decision makers tend to prioritize interventions that increase the precarity of the people they purport to protect, and foreclose more transformative and redistributive alternatives. I also use participatory research methods to understand how some groups, for example, migrants and sex workers, navigate their precarity and regulatory environments and mobilize for rights.
Broadly speaking, my work is interested in looking at the role of digital culture and looking at how online platforms, aesthetics and effect have an impact on queer representation. And I look at this in the context of India. But I also take a very critical view of digital media, understanding that only certain people have access to it because the space is both class, caste, as well as race. So one of the new pieces of work that I've been working on is looking at cultural labor in the context of India and how issues of inequality is surfaced through the lens of gender, caste, and class.
Investigating the cultural dimension of our social lives is central to our understanding of how gender and sexuality, as it intersects with other social categories and axes of power such as race and class, most saliently, work through the everyday and are circulated. This includes different accounts of history, how we understand our histories, where we belong, who the others are, but also different modalities of memory politics. Currently, I am focusing on authoritarian politics and the politics of hatred and the cultural wars that are being centrally weighted on gender, sexuality, race and migration.
What gender really offers in understanding political economy is the interweaving of labor, care and social reproduction, which is really how people experience their everyday lives. So that's what gender offers to us in terms of understanding structures, power relations and inequalities in political economy. My work thinks about how the world of work is changing in terms of what's happening after the COVID-19 pandemic, or what's happening in terms of advancing digital technologies. One of the ongoing projects that I have, and this is a longitudinal ethnography, is with young women in Delhi who are going into new kinds of service work. And the method here is actually quite important for me. So the method that I adopt in doing my research is long-term engagement with people who are living lives on an everyday basis and really paying attention to what's happening in their everyday lives and how they're navigating different kinds of changes to the world of work.
Like all social processes, the provision of security, the conduct of conflict, and the attainment of peace are deeply gendered processes. Gender roles influence who takes part in conflict and in what capacity, and also what kinds of harms they're likely to experience. Gender and feminist research provide important insights into these questions related to peace, conflict, and security. And in fact, in doing so, they often upend received ideas about what we think conflict is, when it begins and ends, as well as how peace might be achieved. My recent work explores what kind of training on the topic of gender is given to military personnel and police officers who deploy abroad as part of international peacekeeping operations. This work asks critical questions about what gender is thought to be and do in such training, and the research reveals the operation of racialized global hierarchies through such initiatives, as well as providing ideas for feminist scholars and practitioners on how they might evaluate and engage with such work.
My PhD research explores the role of civil society organisations in shaping and implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is a global policy framework concerned with the gendered drivers of insecurity and conflict. The research sheds light on a group of actors, civil society organisations, both under-researched in academic inquiries into WPS and under-supported in policy and practice. It provides insights on the challenges civil society organisations face in shaping and implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. For example, the negative impact of short-term donor-led funding systems on addressing root causes of violence and insecurity. It also asks what futures could be imagined for the WPS agenda if the ideas, concepts and contributions of civil society organisations are centred, which is really important in thinking about a women, peace and security that could be feminist and transformative in nature.
I have a background in economics and demography. Well, with the combination of economics and demography, I do a lot of work which is about human populations and how they change. So I do research on fertility and health, migration and mortality. And when you're an economist, you tend to think about why people make the decisions that they do and tend to think about people as performing constrained optimization problems. And often the research is about figuring out why people behave the way that they do because we want to nudge them to behave differently. And when you bring a feminist ethics to that kind of research, you start problematizing the way people think research questions should be asked and what researchers should do. And you start looking at how embedded in much broader social processes people are and divert attention from the individual whose behavior you want to change to the social structures within which they're making their choices and how maybe those social structures are unjust and should be the focus of what needs to be changed.
The combined humanities and social science research in the Gender Studies department advances knowledge through empirical investigation, methodological innovation, conceptual development, and theoretical reconfiguration, advancing knowledge on and for a rapidly changing world.